So we'll continue talking about the first line. The best learning is realizing the truth of no self. So why is that the best learning? And it's interesting here, learning means realizing. It doesn't, the best learning is realizing. It didn't say the best learning is memorizing all the points, or the best learning is knowing how to say all the words without understanding them. Yeah, he said the best learning is realizing. Okay, so why is it realizing no self? Because that is the only realization that actually cuts the root of cyclic existence. So bodhicitta, for example, and all of our other practices on the method side of the path are very, very important. That's how we create merit. Without bodhicitta, we can't become a fully awakened Buddha. But without the realization of emptiness, we can't cut the root of samsara. And so bodhicitta cannot cut that root. Yeah, only the mind that directly cognizes the opposite of what ignorance cognizes is capable of cutting the root of the ignorance. Okay? So ignorance grasps at inherent existence. This wisdom realizes the opposite of that, the absence, the emptiness of inherent existence. So it's also one of the most difficult things to realize. His Holiness talks about it, in terms of his own life. But actually he says emptiness is more difficult to understand than bodhicitta, but bodhicitta is more difficult to realize. Interesting. But that doesn't mean that emptiness is, a snap of the fingers, because if it were, we would have attained liberation a long time ago. Okay, so it's not so easy. It takes a lot of work and a lot of contemplation. If you're finding, the teachings on emptiness difficult for you, start out contemplating impermanence. That's a very good way to ease yourself into a better understanding of how things exist, and from there it's easier to get to emptiness. Okay, because when you think about impermanence, and here with impermanence there's gross impermanence like sunrises, sunsets, and death. Yeah, those are gross impermanence. But here really talking about subtle impermanence, the fact that things arise, abide, and cease in every split second, And actually, when you look at it, you can't even find a split second. Yeah? We have this image, like sometimes we hear about, okay, one moment, second moment, third moment, as if they're nice little discrete moments with some kind of glue holding them together so they form a continuity. Actually, when you really sit there, you can't isolate one moment. You cannot find a moment, because whatever you pick, half of it's gone already and half of it is yet to come. So where is that present moment? And yet the present is the only time we ever live. So it's really kind of a puzzle when you get into it. Yeah. But the more you get into that, it can really help with understanding emptiness. Because when you think about subtle impermanence and the fact that things change moment to moment, they aren't the same in the next moment, then automatically the question comes, well, then what is it that goes from one moment to the next? If they aren't the same, and they aren't the same through and through, then can you say that there's an essence that goes from one moment to the next moment? Okay, so that's one way that kind of leads you into emptiness. Another way that leads you into emptiness is when you get into subtle impermanence, You know, why are things having that kind of subtle impermanence? Because they're dependent on causes and conditions. So that means that things don't exist under their own power. They don't support them. They can't support themselves because they're completely dependent on causes and conditions that came before them. And so something that is completely dependent on something else, again, cannot have its own inherent essence. Yeah, because an inherent essence is just sitting there. That's what this thing is. You know, I'm me, inherently sitting here. Yeah, and that's it. Not dependent on anything else. Yeah, and that's the way we feel. But the moment we start looking and seeing, do we really exist as an independent entity in any way, we begin to see that any which way we look, we're completely dependent on other things. Yeah, I mean, we're dependent on our body, our mind. Yeah, we're dependent on our parents. We're dependent on society. Yeah, we're dependent on, you know, this whole makeup of everything around us conditions who we are, and we exist in relationship to it. Yeah, we aren't like one single kind of like little ball in this whole sea of dependent things, and then we're this one thing, yeah, that's in the center, that's independent, and should be able to control the rest of the mess. Yeah? Really sure, you know, we're this independent life. Yeah, that's all dependent. But I'm here, and I should be able to control the rest of that mess. Okay? So, you know, when you start to see, well, actually, no, I'm not this little blob here. And forget controlling anything, you know, it's like, just forget it. Then, you know, you get some feeling of how things, you know, they're changed, they don't have an inherent essence, like that, okay? So those are just some ways that, you know, in addition to studying the philosophy, but maybe some easier ways when you're in your, you know, you're meditating to start to think about emptiness. Lama used to look at us and say, emptiness is not somewhere, someplace far away in another universe. It's right here, dear. He said, it's your very nature. You just don't see it. So not to think of emptiness as something, you know, in some other place that you have to go to. Yeah. That's why I think it's much better to say ultimate truth rather than absolute truth. Absolute truth gives you this idea of an absolute reality that's independent of everything. Ultimate just means the deepest way of existing. Okay, but it's not some absolute somewhere, someplace in another dimension, yeah, that we have to like get all weird about in order to realize. You know, he would look at us, it's right here, you know, right here. Yeah. A continuum of the same type means that what appears from moment to moment looks like the thing that was there from the previous moment. Okay? So like this table, you know, there's a continuum of the same type because this table existed yesterday and the table existed the day before and so on. Okay? So it just means that what you see from moment to moment looks kind of the same. Okay, but just because it looks the same doesn't mean it is the same. That's the point.